Imagine hearing about a newly discovered disease somewhere in the world. Before scientists identify exactly what it is, before laboratories sequence its genetic material, and long before the headlines settle on a name, one question almost always appears. What animal did it come from? It has become such a familiar pattern that most of us barely notice it anymore. A disease emerges. Researchers begin looking for an animal host. Eventually, attention turns to bats, birds, rodents, primates, or livestock. After seeing this happen again and again, it's easy to reach a simple conclusion. Wild animals must be dangerous. That sounds reasonable. Until you ask a much bigger question. Animals have lived on Earth for hundreds of millions of years. Humans have shared this planet with them for thousands of years. If wild animals have always carried microorganisms, why do entirely new human diseases seem to emerge with increasing frequency today? Did nature suddenly become more dangerous? Did viruses somehow become more aggressive? Or have we been asking the wrong question all along? Because when epidemiologists look at the evidence, they don't begin with viruses. They begin with relationships. The relationship between species, the relationship between ecosystems, and perhaps most importantly, the relationship between humans and the natural world. That completely changes where this story begins. Not inside a laboratory, not inside a hospital, but inside one of the oldest biological systems on Earth, life itself. One of the easiest mistakes to make is believing that humans occupy a special position in nature. From our perspective, the world appears divided into two groups, us and everything else. Biology doesn't see the world that way. Every living species is connected through evolution. Every mammal, every bird, every reptile, every amphibian has spent millions of years evolving alongside countless microorganisms. Viruses, bacteria, fungi, parasites. None of this is unusual. In fact, it would be far more unusual if animals didn't carry microorganisms. They've always been part of the same biological system. That realization immediately changes the question. The mystery isn't why animals carry pathogens. The mystery is why humans don't constantly catch them. Scientists estimate that around 60% of known infectious diseases affecting humans originated in animals, while roughly 3/4 of newly emerging infectious diseases can be traced back to animal sources. At first glance, those numbers sound alarming, but there's another way to read them. They reveal just how deeply connected humans remain to the rest of Earth's living systems. After all, humans are mammals. We're not biologically separate from nature. We're one branch on an enormous evolutionary tree shared with millions of other species. Every branch supports its own microscopic community. Each species becomes home to microorganisms that have adapted to survive within that particular host. Most of those microorganisms never leave. Many couldn't survive anywhere else even if they tried. Some have spent millions of years becoming extraordinarily specialized. A virus adapted to one bat species may struggle to infect another bat living in the same forest. The leap into humans is often even more difficult. That may sound surprising, because we usually hear about the rare successes. We almost never hear about the overwhelming number of failures. Every single day, humans encounter microorganisms from the environment. They exist in soil, on plants, in water, around livestock, among wildlife, on the surfaces we touch. Most of those encounters end before they even begin. The microorganism never reaches our cells. Or it reaches them and cannot enter. Or it enters but cannot reproduce. Or it reproduces briefly before our immune system clears it. The vast majority of these microscopic encounters disappear without anyone ever knowing they happened. That means something remarkable is happening all the time. Nature isn't constantly trying to infect us. Nature is constantly filtering possibilities, and suddenly a completely different picture begins to emerge. Wild animals aren't walking reservoirs of diseases waiting to attack humanity. They're living inside enormous ecological networks that have remained largely separate from ours for millions of years. Which raises an even more interesting question. If these natural systems have coexisted for so long, what has started breaking down the boundaries that once kept them apart? For most of history, nature appeared unpredictable. Storms came without warning, rivers flooded, wild animals moved through landscapes beyond human control. But beneath that apparent chaos lies an extraordinary level of order. Over millions of years, evolution separated species into different habitats, behaviors, and ecological niches. Some lived high in forest canopies, others underground, and many never encountered one another at all. That separation didn't just organize animals, it also organized the microorganisms they carried. Every species became its own biological world, with different immune systems, body chemistry, and cell receptors. A microorganism perfectly adapted to one host often struggles to survive in another. That's why scientists don't see spillover as a normal event. They see it as a biological exception. The remarkable fact isn't that some pathogens occasionally cross into humans, it's that billions never do. For millions of years, forests, mountains, rivers, and even differences in animal behavior quietly limited contact between species. Long before modern medicine existed, ecology itself reduced opportunities for microorganisms to explore new hosts. In other words, nature's greatest defense wasn't eliminating pathogens, it was limiting encounters. Every meeting between species is an evolutionary experiment. Most fail before they even begin. Which leads to a much bigger question. What happens when those invisible ecological boundaries begin to disappear? If ecological boundaries protected humanity for millions of years, what happens when those boundaries begin to disappear? Many people assume the answer is simple. A new virus appears. A dangerous mutation emerges. Nature suddenly becomes more threatening. But that's not what scientists observe. The biggest change didn't happen inside viruses. It happened in the world around them. Over the past century, forests have been cleared, cities have expanded, agriculture has intensified, and human activity has reached deeper into natural ecosystems than ever before. None of these changes create new pathogens. They create new encounters. For millions of years, wildlife and humans occupied largely separate ecological spaces. Today, those boundaries overlap more often than ever. Wild animals forage near farms. Livestock graze beside fragmented forests. People travel through habitats that were once rarely disturbed. Each encounter becomes an evolutionary experiment. Can this microorganism survive in an unfamiliar host? Almost always the answer is no, but evolution doesn't depend on a single attempt. It depends on millions of them. That's the critical shift. The probability of a successful spillover may remain extremely small. But if the number of encounters increases dramatically, successful spillovers become more likely, even when the biology stays the same. In other words, emerging diseases aren't necessarily becoming more common because viruses are changing faster. They may be becoming more common because humans are creating more opportunities for viruses to meet new hosts. And yet, even with all these new encounters, one fact remains. Almost every spillover still fails, which means one final barrier still separates a microorganism from becoming a human disease. This time, the barrier isn't ecological. It's biological. By now, we've seen that humans are creating more opportunities for wildlife and people to interact. At first, that sounds like a recipe for more disease, but that's only part of the story. In reality, almost every spillover attempt fails before anyone ever notices it. Why? Because crossing into a new species is only the beginning. A microorganism must first enter human cells. Then it must reproduce. Then it must evade the immune system. Then it must spread to another person. And finally, it must repeat that process again and again. Failure at any one step ends the chain. Scientists call these evolutionary filters. Each filter removes countless possibilities, leaving only a tiny fraction capable of moving forward. That's why spillover isn't a single event. It's a sequence of biological challenges. A successful emerging disease isn't simply a pathogen jumping from an animal into a human. It's the rare outcome of every filter being passed in the correct order. What's remarkable is that these invisible experiments happen constantly. Most end without symptoms, without transmission, without anyone ever knowing they occurred. The outbreaks we eventually notice are only the small number of successes emerging from an enormous number of failures. That changes how we think about disease. History remembers the rare successes. Evolution is shaped by the countless failures. But even after a microorganism passes every biological filter, one challenge still remains. Can it spread through human society? Because surviving inside one person and moving through a civilization are two very different things. Imagine a microorganism has done something extraordinary. It has crossed into humans, survived, reproduced, and even spread to another person. After everything we've explored, that alone is remarkably rare. But in epidemiology, that's still not the end of the story. Infecting a person is very different from moving through a civilization. For most of human history, even successful spillovers had natural limits. Communities were small, travel was slow, and populations remained relatively isolated. A pathogen could spread locally before simply running out of new hosts. Today, the network looks completely different. More than half of humanity lives in cities, while air travel, trade, and transportation connect billions of people through an unprecedented web of daily interactions. From a pathogen's perspective, every flight, commute, and crowded space becomes another opportunity to move. This is where ecology and civilization begin to diverge. Ecology determines whether a pathogen reaches humans. Civilization determines how far it can travel afterward. That's why epidemiologists study far more than microorganisms. They also study cities, transportation, population density, and human mobility. Because diseases don't spread through geography. They spread through networks. And that changes one of the biggest assumptions about emerging diseases. Nature may explain where many diseases begin, but human civilization often determines how large they become, which leaves one final question. If disease emergence reflects the way humans interact with the natural world, what does that tell us about the future? Seen one by one, emerging diseases appear to be isolated biological events, but viewed together, They reveal a pattern. As humans reshape landscapes, expand cities, and connect the world more closely than ever before, we also reshape the opportunities for microorganisms to move between species. That doesn't mean nature is becoming more dangerous. It means the conditions in which evolution operates are changing. This idea lies at the heart of One Health. Human health, animal health, and environmental health are deeply interconnected. Understanding one requires understanding the others. Perhaps that's the most important lesson of all. The future of emerging diseases won't be determined by viruses alone. It will also be shaped by the choices humans make, how we manage land, protect ecosystems, and interact with the living world around us.